Can we change God's mind? And if not, then why should I pray?
Okay. So, the answer to can we change God's mind, it's no. And Colin will explain why.
Yeah. So, short answer is no. God's mind, God's plan, it's immutable. It cannot change. Malachi 4:6 says, I, the Lord, cannot change. So if God could change, that would seem to imply that he has incomplete or imperfect knowledge. Change itself entails lack of perfection. It implies a lack of perfection. If God did change, he'd become better or worse. And in philosophical terms, change is deeply connected to this notion of motion, where potential or potency is actualized by something else. And we know that God is pure act. He's the unmoved mover. There's no possible way that God could be actualized by anything. He's pure actuality, and therefore is immutable, cannot mutate or change. And if he could, he wouldn't be God. So that naturally gives rise to the question of, okay, if God can't change his mind, and there's a divine plan that cannot change, how do my prayers have any impact or any meaning? And maybe Father can shed some light on that.
Yeah, so I think that, first of all, mine is kind of a two-part short answer, which is that when we pray to God for something, or we ask him for something, or to heal somebody, first, one thing that happens is he changes us, he changes our hearts. And the other thing is that for some things, God is not going to act in a certain way unless we ask him. So he's, maybe he won't act the way we want him to, but sometimes he does. If our hearts and our request is in accord with his will, and so there's an interchange that, the Lord is, it's a relationship, So if we don't enter into that relationship by asking God, it's like if I as a kid went into the store and I really wanted a sucker, but I didn't ask my mom for one, well, she's not going to give me one. Because I didn't ask.
Yeah, so God is eternal. He's outside of time and he's omniscient. He knows everything. So he foresees all of our human actions, how we exercise our free will, our prayers, our sacrifices. And in God's divine plan, he can will to bring about certain effects through these causes, like our prayers. So our prayers are meaningful and they do produce an effect, but it fits within that framework in the context of God's divine will, his divine plan. So how that looks like an analogy that Father just gave, say my grandmother is suffering and is dying, and myself and our family were praying for a cure or a relief to suffering or a healing, a physical healing. It might be in God's divine plan that through our prayers that effect comes about and that healing takes place, and that wouldn't have happened otherwise without our prayers. And then, of course, sometimes the answer can be no, and it's not within God's plan that this physical healing occurs, and that's an invitation to, of course, trust God and recognize that there's an infinite gap between, our narrow view of the world and the divine wisdom. So, bottom line, God can will to bring certain things about through our prayers, through our human actions. And that's perfectly compatible with the immutability of God, where our human free will fits within this conception of divine providence.
Yeah. So I think, I was just thinking too about something. for example, like healings, there's a lot involved in healing, and in terms of our faith, the faith of the person who we're praying for, how we pray, just like Jesus. And there were certain things that were present when people got healed in the Bible from him, from his prayers. But that is something that Jesus did. So if we pray for healing, it's something that Jesus did. My example was asking Mom for a sucker, or I suppose you could you could make it an adult thing and say, I would like this brand new Lamborghini. Lord, will you just make that happen for me, please? And well, Jesus didn't go around asking his Father for Lamborghinis, or even physical things for himself. It usually came from the compassion of the Father for people who were suffering. So that's where we get into things that we have to figure out what's God's will sometimes, and do those things, desire those things, and more often, perhaps the Lord will answer those prayers.
Yeah, so ultimately prayer is about bringing our own will into alignment and conformity with the divine will, which is what we pray in the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah. Boom. Mic drop.